They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. Braveheart isn't just a medieval war epic, it's a storm of chaos, danger, ego, and filmmaking obsession that almost collapsed multiple times. Horses crashed, extras fainted, and the crew fought the weather like it was another enemy army. What the audience saw was legend. What happened behind the camera was madness. Welcome to Classic Hollywood. Today, we're diving into 5 insane, dangerous, and shocking facts about Braveheart, the film that redefined historical cinema and nearly destroyed itself doing it. Let's begin. Number 1. The Battle of Stirling. Without Stirling, the movie's most famous battle, the Battle of Stirling, is a breathtaking storm of mud, steel, and screaming chaos. It feels so real, so ferocious, that most audiences never notice what's missing. The bridge. In real history, the Battle of Stirling Bridge, 1297, was fought on a narrow wooden bridge over the River Forth. It was a tactical masterpiece. William Wallace and Andrew Moray trapped the English forces as they tried to cross, slaughtering them in a bottleneck that became legend. But in Braveheart, there's not even a plank of that bridge in sight. Not one. Why? Because Mel Gibson wanted spectacle, not constraint. The real battlefield, narrow, swampy, impossible to choreograph, couldn't handle the massive cavalry charges, hundreds of extras, and sweeping camera moves he envisioned. So the crew packed up and moved to the flat fields of Curragh, Ireland, where the Irish army provided thousands of volunteer extras. It wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a total reinvention of history for cinematic clarity. When the film released, historians lost their minds. Newspapers blasted Gibson for erasing one of Scotland's most symbolic military victories. Critics accused him of turning strategy into spectacle. But Gibson stood his ground. His defense was simple. It's about clarity, not reenactment. And he wasn't wrong. The sequence became one of the most electrifying war scenes of the decade, a mix of raw energy, thunderous sound design, and handheld brutality that made audiences forget the missing bridge entirely. So while the real William Wallace won with brains, the movie Wallace conquered with cinematic muscle. History be damned, the scene worked. The historians lost the battle. But the audience won the war. Number 2. Half the army wasn't even human. When you watch Braveheart, the first thing that hits you after the blue paint and battle cries is the scale. Thousands of soldiers, stretching to the horizon, screaming, charging, clashing in the mud. It looks enormous, like a real medieval army resurrected from the past. But here's the truth. Half that army wasn't even human. Behind the lens, Braveheart's massive armies were part real, part rubber, and part pure illusion. The Irish army volunteered thousands of extras to play both Scottish and English troops. It was a logistical nightmare, training, costuming, feeding, and organizing them for weeks in the cold, muddy fields of Ireland. But even that wasn't enough for Gibson's vision. He wanted the battlefield to look endless, alive, and overwhelming. So the crew built an army of lifeless soldiers, hundreds of dummy warriors, crafted from rubber, wood, and old armor. They were dressed, painted, and placed in rigid formation, spears glued into their stiff hands, standing silently under gray skies. From a distance, they looked flawless, perfectly still ranks of men awaiting the order to charge. But up close, it was pure comedy. The sun would melt the rubber faces. Wind would knock down entire regiments. Armor slipped off. Helmets rolled into the mud. And assistants would sprint onto the field between takes to re-stand fallen soldiers like medieval scarecrows. At one point, a gust of wind toppled over an entire dummy battalion mid-shot. The crew had to cut, run out, and rebuild the whole thing before the next take. The funniest part? Even seasoned Hollywood insiders were fooled. When the film came out, many critics assumed Gibson had used digital replication, a brand new technology emerging in the mid-90 seconds. But there was nothing digital about it. It was all practical, all cardboard, wood, and chaos. And somehow, that old-school movie magic worked better than any early CGI could have. The result was massive illusion through madness, A battlefield built from human sweat and inanimate soldiers. Braveheart didn't just fake an army, it faked an empire. Number 3. Mel Gibson was never supposed to play William Wallace. It's hard to imagine Braveheart without Mel Gibson's face painted blue, roaring freedom across a blood-soaked battlefield. It's become the image of the movie, maybe even the decade. But here's the twist. Mel Gibson never wanted to play William Wallace. In the beginning, Gibson was only supposed to direct. He had just come off The Man Without a Face, his directorial debut, and he was looking for a bold new project, something epic, dangerous, and deeply emotional. When writer Randall Wallace, no relation to William, handed him the script, Gibson was instantly hooked by the story's scope. Rebellion, betrayal, love, legend. It was Shakespeare, drenched in mud and blood. But when it came to casting Wallace himself, Gibson refused. He thought he was too old, too famous, too American to convincingly play a Scottish folk hero. He wanted a fresh, unknown face, someone audiences could believe, as a farmer turned freedom fighter. The studio disagreed. Paramount and 20th Century Fox were terrified. They were about to spend tens of millions of dollars on a dark, violent, historically ambiguous epic, and they needed a star to justify that risk. Someone who could sell tickets worldwide. And that someone was Mel Gibson. Under intense pressure from the studio and his producers, Gibson finally caved. But what nobody realized was that his decision would throw the entire production into controlled chaos. Directing and starring in a film of this size was practically unheard of, especially one filled with complex battles, huge locations, and thousands of extras. Gibson didn't just have to perform, he had to command an army. Imagine this. One moment, he's charging across a muddy field with a broadsword, screaming at English troops. Seconds later, he yells, "Cut!" and turns to give camera notes, lighting corrections, and stunt adjustments. Still covered head to toe in fake blood. Crew members said Gibson would switch between actor and director in seconds, barking orders in full costume, his face streaked with war paint and sweat. He was the heart of the battle and the eye behind the camera. The strain was relentless. Shooting days ran long, the schedule ballooned. Gibson's physical exhaustion bled into his performance, the limp in his walk, the fatigue in his eyes, all real. But out of that exhaustion came something rare: authenticity. You weren't just watching an actor playing a warrior, you were watching a man become one through sheer determination, pressure, and pain. When the film finally wrapped, Gibson swore he'd never take on a dual role like that again. But it was too late. His decision to step in front of the camera didn't just save the production, it defined it. It turned Braveheart from a risky historical drama into one of cinema's most iconic legends. Not ego, not vanity, just survival. Number 4. The torture scene is almost silent for a reason. The ending of Braveheart is one of the most emotionally shattering moments in film history. William Wallace, beaten, broken, and chained, dragged before the English crowd to face his execution. It's not just a death scene. It's a transformation from man to myth. But there's something eerie about that moment that most audiences don't consciously notice. It's not the visuals, it's the sound. The execution sequence is disturbingly quiet. No loud screams. No dramatic orchestral score overwhelming the moment. Just breath, movement, the creak of wood, the reaction of the crowd. It feels intentional, like silence is the weapon. And in a way, it is. But the truth behind it is far stranger. During filming, the sound team recorded every element of the sequence. The ropes tightening, the wind whipping, Wallace's labored breaths. But when they went to review the Foley tracks, disaster struck. The recordings were ruined. Wind whipped through the microphones. Flags and banners flapped so violently that they drowned out most of Gibson's performance. The screams distorted. The atmosphere unusable. A technical nightmare for one of the most crucial scenes in the film. The easy fix? Re-record the sounds in a studio, bring Gibson back in to perform the agony. That's what any other production would have done. But Gibson made a radical choice. He decided to leave it broken. Instead of layering in fake screams or dramatic sound effects, he removed almost everything. He stripped the sequence bare until all that remained was raw silence, punctuated only by breathing, wood, and the murmuring crowd. And something incredible happened. That silence hurt more than any scream ever could. The audience felt every moment, the anticipation, the dread, the emotional weight of a man refusing to surrender even as his life was ripped apart. The absence of sound became the sound of pain itself. In early test screenings, the scene was almost unbearable to watch. Some people turned away. Others wept. No one spoke when the credits rolled. That quiet wasn't just an accident. It became art born from error, a technical failure transformed into emotional perfection. Wallace's last breaths echo not through volume, but through silence. And when he finally shouts freedom, it cuts through that silence like a blade sharp, human, unforgettable. That moment doesn't just end the movie, it defines it. Not gore, not spectacle, just silence, and everything it stands for. Number 5. The kilts don't belong. In this century, the image is burned into movie history. Hundreds of Scottish warriors, faces painted blue, charging into battle with wild hair flying and tartan kilts swirling in the wind. It's so vivid, so symbolic, so Scottish that it feels authentic to the bone. Except, it isn't. Not even close. Here's the historical truth. Kilts didn't exist in William Wallace's time. Not a single one. The film takes place in the late 13th century. The earliest evidence of the traditional Highland kilt doesn't appear until the 16th century, nearly 300 years later. That means that the most recognizable costume in Braveheart, the very thing that defines its visual identity, is anachronistic. So why did Gibson and his team do it? Because historical accuracy sometimes kills cinematic power. The film's costume designer, Charles Node, knew the truth. He had researched the era thoroughly. Historically, the real Wallace and his men would have worn plain linen tunics, loose, shapeless garments, often brown or gray, belted at the waist. Authentic? Yes. But on camera? Dull, indistinct, and nearly impossible to tell apart in the mud and chaos of war scenes. Node faced a choice. Follow history or create iconography. He chose iconography. The tartan kilt offered instant visual identity. It moved beautifully in motion. It gave the Scots a tribal unity, a look that audiences could instantly connect to rebellion, pride, and heritage. The moment you see it, you feel who these men are. The gamble worked beyond anyone's imagination. When Braveheart premiered, audiences embraced the look completely. They didn't care about historical timelines, they cared about emotion. The swirling tartans became a cinematic shorthand for freedom itself. But historians were furious. Scottish scholars filled newspapers with editorials. They accused the film of rewriting fashion history, of confusing national identity with Hollywood myth. The debate raged for years. And yet, something unexpected happened. Tourists started showing up in Scotland wearing kilts inspired by the movie. Tartan sales spiked, and a new generation, especially among younger Scots, began wearing kilts proudly, calling them Wallace kilts. In a strange twist of fate, Braveheart's historical inaccuracy reshaped real culture. A piece of cinematic fiction fed back into Scottish tradition. So yes, the kilts are wrong. Wildly wrong. But they're also unforgettable. Because sometimes history gives us facts, and cinema gives us myth. And it's the myth that lasts. Braveheart isn't just a film. It's proof that chaos, risk, and conviction can create something timeless. It's history rewritten through mud, fire, and raw emotion. If you love diving behind the scenes of Hollywood's most legendary films, hit subscribe to Classic Hollywood, where every story reminds us why movies aren't just made, they're survived.